All right, what's going on? Welcome back to the Ovens Garage. Today we're here working on my 1993 Dodge W250, and we're going to be rebuilding the vacuum pump. So we're on the driver's side of the engine block here. This is the vacuum pump. They're in three separate pieces, and there's seals that are in between the pieces, and it's common for the vacuum pump to develop an oil leak that might make you believe you're leaking engine oil from the bottom of this pump, or it might make you think that you're leaking oil from your oil pan, because this is right next to the oil pan. On the back of it is the power steering pump, so it's gear driven from this vacuum pump, and that runs your power steering pump. So this is the view from the driver's side bottom of the engine of the vacuum pump. You can see the seams of the three pieces of the vacuum pump and where it would be common for the oil to leak from the bottom. You can see the bottom of the power steering pump there is quite wet too. All right, the first thing we're going to do is remove this vacuum supply line, and then we'll come back to the back side of the power steering pump. And then on the back of the power steering pump, we need to remove this hose, which just has a clamp, and then remove that power steering line from the back of the power steering pump. All right, so we pulled the two lines off the back of the power steering pump. It's a 16 millimeter on the hard line, and then we had some difficulty getting off of this line. It was the hose with just the clamp, it wouldn't come off, so we had to cut it, and we're gonna have to replace the hose from here to the steering box. Again, that's just this hose comes back to here, so it'd be a good idea to get a hose to replace that one. All right, so next we got to remove this oil line that's on the bottom of the vacuum pump. We're using a 9/16 stubby wrench to get in there and remove it from the bottom of the pump here. All right, so we got the oil line off, and the only remaining thing to do on the power steering pump there would be to take the bolt off just right here, but that bolt's missing, so we don't have to remove it. And then we'll be able to take the two bolts that are mounted into the back of the timing case. So the two bolts on the front are 15 millimeter. Oil pressure sensor's in the way, so let's unplug that guy. All right, here's the rebuild kit for the vacuum pump. It comes with all the seals. This is the Doran part number. I'll also list the Cummins part number in the description box below if you want to go with Cummins part. All right, we've got the pump on the bench now. First thing we need to do is take these three 15 millimeter nuts off to remove the power steering pump. All right, so we can remove the power steering pump from the vacuum pump assembly now. Set this off to the side. All right, the first thing we're gonna do on the vacuum pump is remove these two 17 millimeter bolts, and then there's 17 millimeter nuts, and then there's 10 millimeter bolts after that. So we'll take the 17 mils off first. Okay, now we can pull that back section off. You can see where one of the O-rings is. Set that off to the side. Now we'll take these, looks like there's a spacer in there. Now we'll take these three 10 millimeter bolts off. We're ready to pull the next section off. All right, so we cleaned up all three pieces of the vacuum pump, and now we can begin to replace the seals. First, we'll replace the seal on this one, and then there's a seal on the outside of this guy, and then on the inside of here, we'll have to press that one out and press in a new one. And then the fourth one just goes against the timing case on the back side of the pump. All right, so we're gonna remove this with a pick. This one's a pretty thin O-ring. There it is, there's the first one. Okay, we're gonna install the new gasket, or O-ring. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do on this is remove this seal. So the spring is facing up in this direction. So we have a 1-inch socket to press it out. And press it out through this side. And then we're gonna have to press it in from the other side. And I'm using a 27mm socket. Old seal's out. All right, so we're gonna put the seal in. Again, the spring goes in when you press it in. I'll use my 27mm socket. Just gonna get that started. All right, and the last seal that we're gonna replace is this one. So we'll pick this out of here. Oh, one more thing. Just make sure it's seated in all the way. We were pressed in there. Just kind of peek in from this side, make sure it's seated fully against the inside of this housing. But we'll pick this out, this old seal out. Oil the new O-ring up. And then we'll put it onto here. Boom. Just like that. Okay, now we can reassemble the pump. All right, so this can only go on one way. We'll make sure our surfaces are clean. We've got our new O-ring installed on this side of the pump. There's an indexing tab there. So slide that on and then throw the 10mm bolts back in. Okay, now we'll put the third piece of the pump back on. Don't forget to put that drive gear back in there. And then this can go on here two ways, but on the oil feed of the bottom of the pump, the ears stick further out on this side of this piece. So that goes towards the bottom of the pump where the oil feed is. We'll slide that on there, get the nuts on, and then snug that down so the O-ring's seated. All right, now that we have that on, we're gonna reinstall the power steering pump. Again, it goes through our new seal. Put a bit of oil on the seal. And then we'll put the power steering pump in there. So one of our studs came out with the nut. Get these two on. All right, and the power steering pump and vacuum pump are back together. I've already cleaned up the surface on the back of the timing case for this gasket. And we'll go ahead and throw it in the truck. The pump's going back in. Got the new gasket on. Make sure your gasket's seated properly. then we'll go from the bottom, put the other bolt on, make sure the gasket's seated. All right, so we have both bolts to the timing case tight. I've put back on the oil feed line on the bottom of the vacuum pump, and then we found a bolt to fit in here, and then there's a little spacer that goes on that side of the bracket. We just put in a few washers there to take up the gap, and we tighten it down. So now the back of the vacuum pump is attached to the block, so hopefully there's a little less stress on the back of that. And now we can go from the top side. We'll reconnect the vacuum hose and the power steering hoses. All right, so we've got the vacuum supply line hooked back up to the vacuum pump, as well as the power steering lines on the power steering pump. At this point, we'll top up the fluid in the power steering reservoir, and then we'll do the bleed procedure for the power steering system to make sure that all the bubbles are out of the system and we're at the correct level in the power steering system. Okay, so the bleed procedure is we will fill up the power steering reservoir, start the truck for a few seconds, and then turn it off, check the steering reservoir again. Do that a few times, and then once we're done that and it's at a good level, we'll jack up the front of the truck, get the wheels off the ground, start the truck, turn the wheels back and forth slowly a few times, and then check our power steering reservoir level. And then we'll do that over again a couple times until all the bubbles are out of the system and the power steering reservoir level is in a good spot. Okay, so we bled the power steering. We turned the wheels back and forth a bunch of times with the front of the truck jacked up. The power steering is at a good level now, and we can consider the rebuild of the vacuum pump done and the power steering system checked. All right, so that wraps up the rebuild job on the vacuum pump. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video. We're gonna be ripping out the transmission, ripping out the oil pan to replace the rear main seal and the oil pan gasket. Thanks for watching. Cheers.